there and welcome to Global Business Africa. We'll be giving you insight into Africa's business and financial markets. I'm Uche Okoronkwo coming to you from Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Let's start with a look at the markets. Now, New Year gains have been wiped out across several markets over tensions between the US and Iran. Emerging market stocks slipped for a second day as we saw investors discouraged from buying risky assets. MSCI's index for emerging market stocks fell about 1% on the day. It retreated from near 19-month highs. Meanwhile, South Africa's JSE falling over 1% a day, with banks dropping over 2%, while of course we saw gold miners benefiting from the surge in gold prices, climbing about 2.4% on the day. Now, also coming up on the show, we examine the aftermath following the fallout of Iran-US tensions, the latest toys on display at this year's edition of the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas, and a convict in Burkina Faso transcends the confines of prison with music. Well, let's kick off today's show in Iran, where huge crowds gathered in the capital, Tehran. They're paying their respects to military commander Qasem Soleimani. Now, Soleimani was killed by a U.S. drone on the orders of U.S. President Donald Trump in Baghdad in neighboring Iraq on Friday. Thousands of people attended a special prayer ceremony at the University of Tehran, including the country's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. And of course, President Hassan Rouhani was there as well. Now, Soleimani's body will be buried in his hometown of Kerman on Tuesday. He, of course, was the architect of Iran's drive to extend its influence across the Middle East. His death has stoked concern around the globe that a broader regional conflict could erupt.
This is how Iran's supreme leader honors the country's top military commander, a man he once described as a living martyr of the revolution. The whole country is grieving. The daughter of the prominent general, who was killed by a U.S. airstrike on Friday, warned of a dark day coming for America.
Families of the American soldiers in Western Asia have witnessed America's humiliation in Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, Afghanistan, Yemen, and Palestine wars, and will spend their days waiting for the death of their children.
Other top Iranian military officials have vowed revenge.
The only thing that can compensate for his blood is the complete removal of America from the region and taking away their evil from the oppressed people of the region.
Soleimani's assassination also puts the 2015 Iran nuclear deal in danger. On Sunday, Iran announced it would take the final step in reducing its commitments under the agreement, saying it would enrich uranium without restrictions. U.S. President Donald Trump's order to eliminate Soleimani not only infuriated Iran, but also its neighbor Iraq. Iraq's parliament called for the expulsion of foreign troops from Iraqi soil.
The government should end the presence of any foreign forces and prevent them from using the lands, water, and sky of Iraq.
On the American side, the rhetoric is defiant as well. Right after the Iraqi parliament cast the vote, President Trump threatened sanctions against Baghdad, warning that the sanctions will be as hard as those slapped on Iran. Trump also threatens to bomb Iran's cultural sites, an action that experts consider tantamount to a war crime. As the world ushers in a new decade, the U.S. assassination of a prominent figure in Iran's government opens a new chapter of spiraling tensions in the Middle East.
Now, over in the U.S., the House of Representatives is set to introduce a War Powers Resolution bill this week. The measure aims to limit President Donald Trump's ability to take military action against Iran. It appears that Trump did not consult with Congress before taking military action against Tehran last week. As a result, this has ignited a fierce debate about presidential power and, of course, the legality of such a move. In a letter to her Democratic colleagues, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said that the vote on a War Powers Resolution mandates that if no further congressional action is taken, the government's hostilities with Iran would cease within 30 days. Well, let's talk further about the U.S. House of Reps move and, of course, the wider impact of the developing tensions between the U.S. and Iran. We're joined now by Katie Gregory. She is in New York. Katie, great to have you on the show. Now, as the fallout widens with Iran now abandoning that nuclear deal, the House of Reps now says it will soon vote on a war powers resolution to limit President Trump's, of course, military actions. What's the latest from the White House and, of course, Capitol Hill?
Well, hi. Members of Congress returned to Washington today, of course, from their holiday recess, and they're certainly coming back to this full slate of affairs. Now, as you say, last night, House of Representatives Speaker Nancy Pelosi said the chamber would introduce and vote this week on this war powers resolution that would force President Trump to stop military action against Iran within 30 days. But there's little expectation that this legislation will win enough support to become law. Even though Democrats control the House, as we know, Trump's fellow Republicans control the Senate and are likely to vote down any such measure. So while the Democrats may be outraged over Trump's failure to inform Congress in advance of the strike, lawmakers have a few options to reduce any escalation of tensions here. Now, keep in mind that under the US War Powers Act, the president had to inform Congress within 48 hours of introducing military forces into armed conflict abroad. Now, Trump broke precedent in two ways. One, he failed to inform congressional leaders before the attack on Soleimani occurred. And two, he classified his formal notification to Congress of the attack on Saturday. Some legal experts say that by making this notification classified, Trump actually limited the lawmakers' ability to talk about it and then sidestepped the law's goal of keeping Americans informed about military action. So now Senate leaders are urging Trump to declassify this notification, and his administration officials are expected to brief Congress on Iran this week. Of course, lawmakers are demanding a detailed explanation of the justification for this strike against Soleimani and to be informed of any future plans.
Now, of course, investors are obviously rattled by these recent events. We saw stocks extending losses today. How are investors responding, especially to this recent move? And does this look like it will be a big driver of markets in the short or the long term?
Well, stocks in Asia and Europe did finish lower, but in Europe they were down less than 1%. Now, US stocks did start the day in negative territory, but have cut their earlier losses slightly. At last check, the Nasdaq Composite, which includes those large tech companies like Apple and Facebook, is actually higher. The broader S&P 500 is hovering around the gain line, and market watchers say that investors are awaiting now a response from Iran. For now, though, they are focused on other considerations like upcoming corporate earnings season and, of course, developments on trade. With stocks still near all-time highs here, Rick Meckler, who is actually a partner in a New Jersey-based investment firm, says investors are probably reluctant to commit a lot of new capital at these levels, but are also not interested in then pulling back, which leaves markets a bit range-bound at the moment. Of course, that could all change if there are more attacks. Energy prices do continue to climb. As of now, oil has jumped with Brent crude futures soaring over $70 a barrel. But the attacks have not had any direct impact on oil production. We have seen consistent gains for areas considered safer investments like utilities and, of course, those safe haven assets like gold as well.
Right. Well, we do know NATO ambassadors met in Brussels today to discuss the situation. Now, given that European allies are urging Trump to ease tensions with Tehran going forward, what do you expect to come out of that meeting?
Well, yes, as you can imagine, NATO is monitoring the situation very closely indeed, with fears that it could erupt into this broader regional conflict. Now, the NATO Secretary General organised this meeting at short notice, and we have heard it included all 29 member ambassadors. It also comes after the alliance decided on Saturday to suspend its training mission in Iraq over security risks. And also just yesterday, Iraq's parliament called on US troops to leave the country, but President Trump, in response, has threatened sanctions against Baghdad. So there will be plenty for the alliance to discuss. The EU member nations will have to strike a balancing act between their US ally and also this desire to ease tensions with Iran. Of course, we know Germany, France and the UK are among those calling for a de-escalation of tensions in the Middle East. Turkey, meanwhile, has warmer relationship with Iran than other alliance members, and its foreign ministry said it is deeply concerned over the situation between the US and Iran. So expect some tough meetings at NATO headquarters as the alliance tries to sort of find a unified way forward on this.
All right. Well, we'll certainly be watching. Many thanks for your insight there, Katie. That's Katie Gregory joining us there in New York. Well, heading back to the continent, police in Nigeria have issued a warning against planned protests over the killing of Qasem Soleimani by the U.S. government. Senior officers have been directed to increase surveillance and deploy more men to ensure maximum security. CGTN's Deji Batmus has more for us.
The police issued the directive after sporadic protests erupted in some parts of the north of the country, condemning the killing of the Iranian general. The police authorities say it has intelligence reports some local groups sympathetic to Iran are planning to embark on massive public disturbances and sabotage, stopping short of mentioning any name. Now, Shiite groups like the Islamic Movement of Nigeria, IMNN, which the Nigerian government banned sometime last year, is known to enjoy the support of Iran. The leader of the group, Ibrahim El-Zakzaki, has since been in government custody despite a series of protests by the group demanding his release. It's not known if the outlawed group now had planned any protest over the killing of General Soleimani, but it clearly appears the government does not want to take chances on it, and that is why the police authority issued that directive. For now, things are calm. The police say its men are on red alert across the country and that any protest would be decisively dealt with. Deji Batmus, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Well, now let's take a look at our corporate headlines today. Zimbabwe's largest lender, CBZ Bank, intends to raise about $80.6 million through the sale of bonds. Now, the funding will help finance maize and soybean farming as the Southern African economy faces another drought. According to the United Nations, up to 8 million people, equivalent to half of Zimbabwe's population, are expected to require food aid this year. And that's after last year's maize harvest fell by nearly a half. Meanwhile, South Africa's third largest lender, Absa Group, has confirmed the appointment of a former Reserve Bank Deputy Governor, Daniel Minele, as its group chief executive. Minele is Absa's first black CEO. He takes over from Rene van Wyk, who was at the helm of the lender as interim CEO. That's following the retirement of Mario Ramos in February 2019. Revenues of Egypt's Suez Canal reached around $5.8 billion last year. During the 2019 period, the canal accommodated over 18,000 ships with a net tonnage of roughly 1.2 billion tons. It is the fastest shipping route between Europe and Asia. The man-made canal is also one of Egypt's main sources of foreign currency. And lastly, Canadian miner First Quantum Minerals is weighing investing around $1 billion in order to lift output at Africa's biggest copper mine in Zambia. The investment will add a decade of life at the Kansanshi copper mine. It will also increase annual production to about 300,000 tons over time. Securing board approval, however, is set to complicate plans for First Quantum, as of course disputes between miners and the Zambian government over taxes and assets continue to rage on. That's a look at our corporate headlines. Well, we are heading into a short break now, but still to come on the show. Small traders in Kenya to begin paying a 3% sales tax. And persistent drought in South Africa takes a toll on its wildlife.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sutra. Hello, Naro.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference.
Welcome back. Now, traders operating small businesses here in Kenya start paying a 3% tax on their sales to the Kenya Revenue Authority from this month. This, of course, follows the reintroduction of the levy in the Finance Act of 2019. Now, Kenya's President Uhuru Kenyatta signed it into law last November 7th, reintroducing the turnover tax for businesses whose annual sales are below $50,000, and that was in order to boost tax collections in the country. Well, let's take this all apart. We're joined by Nikhil Hira. He's a tax partner at Bowman's Law. Great to have you on the show with us, Mr. Hira. Well, let's talk about how Kenya is heading into this year in terms of taxes, a lot of new taxes on hand. Of course, we talked about the turnover tax at 3% of revenues. At the end of 2018, we saw that contentious 8% VAT on petroleum products, amongst others. Do you expect further changes to Kenya's tax code this year?
There almost certainly will be. There are every year. And I think the problem that we're seeing with the government today is that they're so behind on their collections that they're inventing new taxes as they go along. But let's go back to this turnover tax because there's been a lot of debate about it. I think the first thing to say, it's been in the law for many, many, many years. It was designed to catch those people with a turnover less than around about $50,000 or 5 million shillings. And these are the people that generally are in the informal sector. And the idea was you just pay 3% of your turnover, no further tax, no other returns to file, that's it. Last year, so Finance Act 2018, or 2 years ago now, they abolished it and introduced this tax where they said pay 15% of the business permit that you pay the counties.
Right.
Now that to me didn't make a lot of sense because the idea of the turnover tax was presumably to go after the people who are not in the tax net. And if you've got a business premises and are paying business permit fees, then you're probably already in the tax net because you've given a PIN number and what have you. And I think after a year of doing that, they realized that they weren't really getting anywhere with this, so they've reintroduced the turnover tax. But you continue to pay this 15% business permit tax, except it's now an advance tax which you offset against your turnover tax that you declare monthly. But has it been successful? Not really, because it's very, very difficult to actually police and enforce tax in the informal sector. They're nomadic by nature. You register them here today, they're there tomorrow, and you'll never be able to catch up with them. So I'm not convinced the turnover tax is actually going to hit the numbers and increase our numbers significantly during the course of 2020.
Well, another new tax that Kenya's government is bringing on is they're going to start levying new taxes on digital markets going forward, or online commerce. Now, give us a sense of what kind of firms will be targeted, how that implementation will work. As you mentioned, it didn't work so well when it came to this turnover tax. And could they find themselves butting head with international companies on this new digital tax?
This one is a big can of worms.
Right.
This digital electronic taxes and what have you. And it's not just Kenya, they're all over the world. I mean, you've heard of the Google tax and the Amazon tax and the Apple tax and what that's happened in many parts of the developed world. What they're trying to do here is bring into the net those people that are perhaps offering you services outside the country, but being consumed in the country. So me downloading on my iPad, or me using a taxi service and what have you. The problem, I think, with it is that they've come up with this definition of a digital marketplace, which actually doesn't make a lot of sense. It's quite vague. It's quite, maybe it was intentional that it be vague so that they bring more people in. But I think it's just going to result in a lot more fighting with the authorities on what is taxable and what isn't. The second thing I think to note is, Uche, that it was supposed to come into force on the 1st of October or later if the President gave assent later, which you said at the beginning was the 7th of November.
Right.
But when it did come into force finally, there was an additional line in the law which said that the Cabinet Secretary for ICT is required to issue regulations for the implementation of the tax. Now those regulations are not there, so the tax is not in a sense in place right now. And in my experience, regulations take up to a year to even come into place. So again, it's almost as though we're being reactive rather than proactive in our tax plan.
So some of these not coming on board this
Yeah.
year. Now, the government also has indicated its intention to increase other rates, such as the capital gains tax. We talked about the income tax law. Could the current slowdown in growth going on currently in Kenya's economy, is that a deterrent going forward against introducing some of these new taxes?
Not really. I think when we look at the income tax bill, which they issued a couple of years back, I was very disappointed with what they issued because it was simply a consolidation of 40 years of legislation. It didn't actually address the issues of how is business conducted in the 21st century. I think we need a new income tax act, and we need it quickly.
Right.
But it's got to be a good act. It can't be, just hurriedly put onto the table without any stakeholder input, because I think that will just create more problems as we go along. I also think you've got to remember that this has got to go through Parliament. And with the legislative agenda with BBI, depending on which way it goes, and everything else they've got to do, how high on the list of priorities is the new Income Tax Act going to be? That's something that we've got to bear in mind.
What are your thoughts? Give us a clearer view on your thoughts on that income tax law.
Well, my view was, as I said, they took 40 years of legislation, 1973 all the way up to 2018, I think at the time, and tried to consolidate it. The idea was to make it simpler. Well, in a way they did. The act reduced from about 130 odd sections to about 60 something. The number of schedules reduced. Yes, it became a little bit simpler, but it didn't go down to the nitty-gritty. I mean, one simple example, the taxation of insurance companies, which has been really confused in Kenya. They simply took what we've currently got, put it in the new income tax bill. That to me is not addressing how insurance companies work today. And I think that's where we're losing out. We're not thinking long term, we're thinking about tomorrow rather than next year, which is an issue for the country.
Well, a lot of this is about revenue collection for the government going forward. What are your thoughts on what we've seen in terms of the targets reached in Kenya's revenue collection targets going forward? 6.2 billion in taxes raised by the end of November. What revenue yield do you expect Kenya to see going forward? And given that we're seeing more and more corporate firms, listed firms reporting profit warnings, is the revised tax revenue target, that's about $16.8 billion, still feasible going forward?
Absolutely not.
In
short, absolutely not. You saw quarter three and quarter four, quarter three at least, economic growth had dropped I think it came down to 5.1%. There has been a gradual drop in that, so where we've been projecting 6.1% for 2019, if we hit 5.5, I'll be impressed. So that in itself is going to have an impact on tax collections, and we're already seeing that in a way. We've introduced new taxes on, well, not new taxes, we've changed import declaration fees and railway development levy to tax more on finished goods imported. Problem is that we are an import-based nation at the moment. So if you start increasing these taxes, people are not going to spend, and we're seeing that. I mean, you just need to go into a mall in Nairobi, no one is really spending. I mean, spending is very tight. You talk to people, to retailers, how their Christmas was, most of them are saying we had a bad Christmas, probably one of the worst we've had. And to just nail that home, that 8% increase on VAT, which you mentioned on fuel products, in the first 6 months after that, I understand there was a huge, significant, I think it may have been as much as 20% drop in consumption.
Right.
Which means not only did you not collect the VAT, you didn't collect the corporate tax because the oil companies were not making their profits. You didn't collect road maintenance levy. You didn't collect excise duty. So, you know, it's been proven. Raise the taxes, the chances are the collections will go down.
Right.
We've seen it in our own country. In the 90s, early 90s, we had a top rate of tax of 65%. In fact, for some individuals, 83%. Brought it down to 30%. Look at the collections. It was a 45-degree linear line. So reduce the tax rates and I think you'll get more. But this business of, you know, introducing a Robin Hood tax which didn't come in, it just makes no sense. It suggests no long-term thinking which the government really needs to do.
And we're not likely to see the government doing any of that going forward.
I don't think so, unfortunately.
Well, we do have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us in the studio. Of course, that was Mr. Nikhil Hira. He's a tax partner at Bowman's Law. Well, let's move on now. Somalis have resorted to eating locusts as they battle an invasion said to be the worst in 25 years. Now, consumption of the locusts is now being considered as a solution to future food shortages in the country, which are caused by recurring drought, which of course delays the harvest. Now, tens of thousands of hectares of farmland are being destroyed as desert locusts swarm over Somalia. About 70,000 hectares of farmland in both Somalia and neighboring eastern Ethiopia have been reported destroyed. Farmers have continually called on the government and the international community for assistance in order to save their farms.
We have tested the eating of the locust here. It's a great diet. It's not only new to Somalia, but it's consumed across the globe. I eat it in my breakfast, lunch, and it's very healthy. I used to feel some back pain before, but now I'm very okay. I will continue consuming it because it's also halal.
Somalia never had used it or eaten insects or even snakes or even other things because it had, you know, livestock, animal, enough food. Now, the neighboring countries, the whole world, they have seen the social media, religiously where it is not haram. So they have, these people for fun probably, they started.
Well, still in Somalia, the country's fisheries ministry has now ordered an investigation into the mass deaths of a small fish species in the country. The dead fish were found along the Halane base camp in the capital, Mogadishu. They're known as EYDI and are largely used by fishermen as a bait to catch other fish. For decades now, Somalia has been a victim of illegal fishing, a move the government claims is mostly instigated by foreigners along their coast. Now, at the same time, Mogadishu has been unable to dispatch patrol ships in order to guard Somali waters, which cover one of Africa's largest shores. The Horn of Africa nation, however, says it's keen to expand revenues through the earmarking of income-generating activities such as fishing.
There are negative media reports about poisoned fish, which are not true. The fish prey on each other, and in that process, some were displaced. And that is what you see on the shores. It has nothing to do with poisoning.
You're watching Global Business Africa. Let's take a quick break now, still to come. Venezuela's state oil firm cedes operations to foreign firms as sanctions bite. And we look at the latest toys on display at this year's edition of the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas.
Data out of the country. The country's foreign currency reserves.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Perina Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed. And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives.
I'm Uche Okoronkwo reporting from Nairobi's city center.
News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference. How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are these stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Just about 1:30, let's recap today's top headlines. Huge crowds gathered in the Iranian capital of Tehran to pay their respects to military commander who was killed in last week's U.S. drone strike, Qasem Soleimani. Thousands of people attended a special prayer ceremony at the University of Tehran, including the country's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. And of course, President Hassan Rouhani was present as well. Soleimani's body will be buried in his hometown of Kerman on Tuesday. And Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan says troops have begun moving into Libya after the parliament in Ankara approved the move last week. The Turkish government has given no details about the scale of the military deployment. President Erdogan says their mission is to ensure stability in the North African nation. And staying with matters security, Tunisia has tightened up security along its borders. The move comes after the death of at least 30 people in an attack on a military academy in the Libyan capital of Tripoli. Now, the deteriorating security situation in Libya is viewed by Tunisia as a constant threat to the North African country's stability. And that's a recap of today's top headlines. Well, let's now shift focus to Venezuela, where state firm PDVSA is now letting some joint venture partners take over the day-to-day operations of its oil fields as its own capacity dwindles. Last year, crude production by PDVSA and its joint ventures fell to their lowest level in nearly more than 2 decades. A steep U.S. sanction on PDVSA aimed at ousting a socialist president, Nicolas Maduro, also evaporated a third of Venezuela's oil output in the period. In the meantime, the government's latest decision to cede some of its oil fields is set to be a breather for the firm. However, some argue the move will be controversial. That's after late President Hugo Chavez made nationalization a flagship policy.
If the private companies learned anything from the government of former President Hugo Chavez, it was that private companies can take advantage of the country's weaknesses. But there will come a government in the future that will put things in their place. In the 90s, they took advantage of the oil opening. They got 1% of royalties. They operated, they sold, and they did whatever they wanted. But the government of President Chavez arrived and we nationalized all that. Now, Maduro is doing the same as at the time of the oil opening, only that he has no legal backing.
Well, let's shift focus now. Every year, thousands of fans and gadget makers descend on Las Vegas for the world's largest tech event, the Consumer Electronics Show. Well, this year, more than 200 new products will be showcased, including artificial intelligence-fueled projector screens, as well as personalized skincare regimens. Now, the show opens on Tuesday and is expected to attract over 4,400 companies and about 170,000 attendees from over 160 countries. During this year's show, artificial intelligence and, of course, 5G networks will be the predominant themes as technological advancements spur growth.
First of all, AI and so artificial intelligence and 5G technologies are kind of seen all over the show. They're really two technology trends that are really impacting every industry segment. And then some of the growth areas that we have at this year's show include everything from like health and wellness to smart cities. I think the exciting thing about CES is that you expect the unexpected. When you walk on that show floor, there's going to be something that you never expected to see at the show, and it's going to be amazing. It's going to make your jaw drop, and you'll walk out of there and be more excited about the future.
Well, let's find out more how this year's CES is setting the tone. We're joined by Adiz Tiansan. He is in Las Vegas. Great to have you on the show with us, Adiz. Now, give us a sense of the cutting-edge gadgets and the companies making the most noise at this year's CES.
Well, like you said, the big day is actually tomorrow when it will open up to public. But for our audience, we managed to take a sneak peek from starting from today already. And we know that there will be many more unveiling events coming up to see what are some of the fanciest, latest technology gadgets that will come out this year, possibly. But for what we've seen so far, just like the previous years, again, there is a good bit of focus on the smart home goods. Again, we are seeing all of our gadgets that we use in our homes are getting smarter and smarter. Just to name a few that I have seen so far, a few of the highlights are a shower head, for example, that has an integrated Alexa system, the audio-controlled assistant that recognizes your voice, that can play music for you, that can make phone calls. Whether you need it or not, you could possibly have that in your bathroom these days. You can also have a trash can that ties up the trash bag by itself whenever it's full. It has sensors in it. You can also have smart mirrors in your home, for example, that will analyze your skin, and it will actually tell you what the problem is, what kind of skin treatment that you can apply to your face. Among other things, I've also seen vacuum cleaners, for example, that can detect the surface type, and it can exactly know what kind of treatment, what kind of cleaning to apply on it. Among many other things, there are also smart keys that can be controlled from your mobile phone, that can be modified and changed all with the click of a button. And just to name of a few highlights here, but really the list goes on. And just behind me, that entire section is just allocated to drone companies. There are dozens of them. And these days, drones can not just fly and take pictures. These days, there are also water resistance. We're seeing some that can actually go underwater, that can be used for fishing, for boating experiences, and some even for rescue. So these technology goods are really in all sectors of life that can be used in all walks of lives.
Those all certainly sound pretty exciting, but we do know the long-awaited 5G. It was a hot topic at last year's CES. Were there any new plans that, of course, further outline how companies plan to use the network technology this year and going forward?
Definitely. I mean, companies are not holding back, even though, yes, China is already on 5G. Here in the US, it is some big cities and only some networks are on it. But certainly there are short-term or mid-term plans to get fully on 5G, and companies are already getting a head start on developing all sorts of goods and technologies that will be utilizing this latest network, especially, like you said, the augmented reality, virtual reality, and robots. These are the big sectors. Now, I'm seeing some robots in this convention that can now recognize faces, that can recognize the voice of their users. Some of them are even touch sensitive. So these robots, some of them come in the shape of pets, for example. They're now wondering maybe some could even accompany elderly people in their homes. They can be used literally in all kinds of services in our lifetimes. And when it comes to the AR and VR experience, I'm seeing some glasses, for example, that you can wear as you go about in their daily life, but it will give you an additional layer of vision where you can snap a picture, you can play a video, you can watch something else throughout your day, you can make a phone call, you can FaceTime your friends in real time. The options are really endless in that regard as well. But like you said, it will still take many more years before we can fully integrate them in our daily lives.
Now, of course, the world of tech has faced intense scrutiny in the past few years. How are we seeing this year's conference tackling those growing concerns around privacy and, of course, security in the sector?
I think that's a great question because it is the Consumer Electronics Show at the end of the day. And when so much data can be shared in such a short period of time, and with so many scandals that these big giant companies were involved in lately, this happens to be a big question this year as well. We are seeing roundtable events taking place, particularly to discuss this issue. Apple, for example, is making a rare appearance at this year's conference. They're sending their top executive for privacy and security issues to take part in those discussions as well. And other companies are also, instead of unveiling their latest products, they are actually taking this opportunity to talk about what they have done in that regard in the sector of privacy and security. Just today on Monday, we've seen Facebook organize an event, for example, to reveal their latest changes in their privacy checkup tools, and we're learning that they have just changed some settings that users can also modify new settings in their data sharing preferences, for example. Amazon has taken a similar step as well in their video doorbell company called Ring, which has also come under scrutiny after it was found out that it was sharing some of those face recognition data with the local police departments. They are now also allowing their users to change certain settings in their application. So while startup companies are trying to get a share in this large technology market, the big companies are trying to use this opportunity to gain more trust, as many of them have come under fire because of their privacy and security issues.
Right. Well, many thanks for that update, Adiz. Of course, we'll be watching for more exciting updates in the coming days. Of course, that's Adiz Tiansan. He's joining us there at the CES in Las Vegas. Now, these days, artificial intelligence is everywhere, but the understanding of what exactly this so-called AI is often confused. Will the cutting-edge technology change the world and the way we work for better or for worse? CGTN's Juliet Munn visited one exhibition in London to find out how artificial intelligence is already revolutionizing art.
This robot is able to teach itself by interacting with its surroundings. Alta 3 has even conducted operas in Japan and Germany. The team behind the creation say it's a neat fusion of art and science.
He's half completed. We need a human input to make him a better artist and a better conductor. It's always we need a human as a part of the algorithm.
AI More Than Human is a London exhibition which looks at the creative and scientific developments in artificial intelligence and gives us a glimpse of what the future may hold. A future that could include computers that think and make art all by themselves. These one-of-a-kind tulips change appearance depending on the price of Bitcoin. Artist Anna Riddler can predict, but not control, which frames will be generated. Back in her studio, she says AI has allowed her to work in new ways.
There shouldn't be this distinction between AI art and human art, because for me, I think there still is a huge amount of humanness in making art with AI. So I consider myself to be the artist in the work, because I'm the one who's coming up with the idea and making the decision, doing all of the different elements of it.
She sees her role as an artist being enhanced rather than endangered by the possibilities of AI.
I had to spend a year almost full time trying to teach a machine what a tulip is. So killer robots aren't quite there just yet.
What AI has in store might seem like the stuff of science fiction, but machine learning is already being used now.
The intervention of technology and the changes to the workplace has been happening for centuries. This new development in technology will allow us to think creatively about how we work. We're all going to have to be evolving our skills, as we always have. I don't think any of us can assume that we have one set of skills for life, and this is what AI is showing us. It's another process of evolution.
These gadgets and gizmos are fascinating AI novelties, but frequently AI is hidden in our day-to-day lives.
This installation mimics movement. That is the future me. But today, artificial intelligence isn't just big and bold, it's all around us, shaping the way we live and work. Juliet Mann, CGTN, London.
Well, let's move on now and take a look at how commodities performed today. Gold prices near a 7-year high, as of course rhetoric from the US, Iran and Iraq did attract safe haven demand to the market. Spot gold is on course for its biggest one-day jump in more than 4 months. Now, following gold's lead, we saw platinum also advancing about 0.6%. Oil prices rose a further 2%, pushing Brent crude above $70 a barrel. That's before it slipped back to $69 a barrel. Well, let's take a quick break now. Still to come. A convict in Burkina Faso transcends the confines of prison with his music.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Now, a severe drought is threatening South Africa's wildlife industry. Game farmers there are, as a result, keeping fewer animals and tourists visiting game lodges in smaller numbers. Now, industry body Wildlife Ranching South Africa estimates that the Northern Cape province has lost more than 2/3 of its game over the last 3 years. Here's CGTN's Terry Wangari with more.
Parts of South Africa have been affected by consecutive years of abnormally hot weather and below average rainfall. As a result, most of the country's landscape is filled with scorched grazing lands and dried up waterholes since 2015, which is the driest year on record. The withered vegetation and parched ground are a serious concern for the wildlife sector.
We've had very little rainfall in the last 6 to 7 years. To the last 5 years, we've had our annual rainfall in the 5 years. So on average, we get about 250 millimeters a year, and that's the total amount we've got in the last 5 years. Hopefully, we are at the end of the drought, because we've been struggling for the last 7 years.
Wildlife Ranching South Africa is conducting a countrywide survey to determine the scale of animal losses and the financial impact on the country's wildlife ranches. The wildlife industry generates revenue for South Africa through tourism, hunting, breeding, and meat production. Trophy hunting alone generated $150 million in 2016.
So we have the feedback that we got from our members, especially as far as pure tourism is concerned, is that it already had an effect of up to about 20%, because Tourism on game farming includes game drives. People want to experience wildlife. They want to have a wildlife experience. And it's very difficult on a private nature reserve to take people on a game drive if they need to experience seeing vultures circling in the air over carcasses, or actually in the very bad areas smelling animals dying in the drought. So yes, that does have a negative influence on tourism.
Southern Africa's temperatures are rising at twice the global average rate, and the level of water in reservoirs is dwindling. The drought has also hit the rest of the region, with Botswana, home to almost a third of Africa's elephants, seeing more than 100 of the creatures die in 2 months last year. Terry Wangari, CGTN.
Well, let's head to Burkina Faso now, where music is helping a convict to transcend the confines of his cell in the capital of Ouagadougou. As CGTN's Mohamed Abubakar reports, take a look.
This correctional facility in Ouagadougou is home to Burkina Faso's latest musical find, Roland Tapsoba, aka Rolby.
I am here at Ouagadougou prison for fraud. I was convicted and sentenced to 60 months in prison. I have so far done 36 months, 3 years, and I have 2 more years left.
There are more than 2,000 inmates here with sentences ranging from a few months to life in prison. According to this budding musician, his new path not only gives him a sense of purpose, but also something he's looking to pursue full-time.
It's normal that when you do something bad, you end up in prison. But I think it's better to prepare for your exit. I have achieved my objective already, and I'm always looking forward to do so even after prison. I can go on and also, why not, support other convicts.
Tapsoba says his passion for music started even before he went to prison. But once convicted, it took him a while to find his inspiration again.
Once you accept that you're in prison, you start to accept other things. So really, I had a lot of ideas for the lyrics and everything, but at the beginning, I was a bit stressed. But after a while, I thought, no, why not start now?
It's during the weekly music lessons that prison guard Karim Ouedraogo noticed Tapsoba's talent.
I think I detected a hidden talent, so I approached him and we talked and he agreed, so I gave him a guitar. He plays it often and creates his own compositions. You saw it, he immediately played with his fellow prisoners, and I think it's great for him and it's also great for us.
With support from Freeman Tapili, a Burkinabe reggae star, Tapsoba has been able to record 4 songs. Through his music, he hopes to inspire the youth to go and work, be proud and live simply. Mohamed Abubakar, CGTN.
Now in South Africa, the city of Cape Town has put on its traditional New Year's Cape Minstrel show. The event marks the day Cape Town slaves used to celebrate the new year. That's a day or two after their masters. The annual street parade is said to be one of the biggest street festivals in Africa. And CGTN's Renee Del Kame tells us more.
It's known as Tweede Nuwe Jaar, or the Second New Year. A day or two after New Year's Day, when the slaves in Cape Town, who had to serve their masters on the 1st of January, finally got a day off to celebrate the new year themselves.
This is the ultimate, this is the highlight of the year. Most of these people live in very poor conditions on the Cape Flats. They're not the type of people who can access holidays during summertime and so forth. This is absolutely massive in the lives of our people. And as you can see, people are simply enjoying themselves. This is the highlight. This is the way we usher in a new year.
Up to 100,000 people are expected to attend this festive event, with locals and tourists lining the streets of Cape Town, all keen to catch a glimpse of this colourful spectacle.
Participating in the Kaapse or Cape Minstrels is an age-old tradition which has been passed down from generation to generation. in Cape Town's so-called coloured community.
Many years, yeah. We've been there, I think, since I was born. We've been raised into this, so it's part of the culture. It's something we look forward to every year. Yeah, this is part of our culture, bringing up, enjoying it.
Since I was a young kid, the minstrels has been part of us, part of our heritage, and up till today, we still do it. We still come out to support them.
The minstrels in our blood, they can't take it away. So we're born for this, of the klopse, kaapse klopse.
This music is based on the types of music and the musicality of our enslaved ancestors. And when the first American minstrel troops came here between 1860 and 1890, our people saw the colorful costumes and the face painting and decided to almost copy this and fuse it with the Gumba beat as we knew it. Carnival evolves, but ultimately our souls and our hearts resonate with this drum beat of ours, as is known as the Gumba beat.
After this iconic Cape Town street parade, the more than 40 minstrel troops will spend the next few weeks strutting their stuff in a tough competition, until mid-February, when one of them will emerge as the best of the best Cape minstrel teams of 2020. Renadal Khan, CGTN, Cape Town, South Africa.
Well, before we go, let's check in on Africa's currencies today. South Africa's rand began the week subdued, and that's over concerns about mounting tensions, of course, in the Middle East. It has been one of the worst performing amongst emerging market currencies this year. It ended last week down by almost 2%. Meanwhile, Kenya's shilling was stable, with remittances and, of course, NGOs helping the supply of dollars in the country. Well, that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. Remember, you can send your feedback to the contacts on your screen. You can also follow us on our various digital media platforms. From me, Uche Okoronkwo, and the rest of the team, thanks for watching.